In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where tree-lined streets whispered stories of peaceful living, there lived a gentle soul named Alex. Their home was modest but cozy, a place filled with memories and small joys. Outside, the garden bloomed with colorful flowers that Alex lovingly nurtured despite their physical limitations. Inside, shelves lined with books created a sanctuary for moments of escape. Life wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Alex had always been someone who preferred solitude over socializing. It wasn't because they disliked people. Rather, chronic health issues often left them drained and unable to keep up with the demands of daily life. Some days were better than others, but every ounce of energy went toward simply staying afloat. Still, Alex found beauty in simplicity, in watching the sunset through their kitchen window or listening to birds chirp in the morning. The neighborhood itself seemed idyllic at first glance. Rows of neatly trimmed lawns and sparkling clean driveways painted a picture of harmony. But beneath this polished surface lay something less charming: the Homeowners Association, HOA. This group prided itself on maintaining what they called community standards. To some, this meant keeping things tidy. To others, like Alex, it felt more like an endless list of rules designed to control even the smallest details of life. At the center of it all was Karen. She wasn't just any member of the HOA. She was its self-appointed enforcer. With her clipboard perpetually in hand and a scowl etched onto her face, Karen patrolled the streets like a general inspecting troops, every weed poking out from a crack in the sidewalk. A violation. Mailboxes not aligned perfectly. Another infraction. For Karen, these weren't minor oversights. They were crimes against the neighborhood's perfection. To Alex, Karen was more than just annoying. She represented everything wrong with the system. Her letters arrived regularly, each one listing new offenses Alex hadn't realized they'd committed. Overgrown grass. Sure, maybe it was taller than usual, but Alex had spent 3 days recovering from a flare-up of their condition. Improper mailbox alignment. Honestly, Alex barely noticed such things anymore. And visible clutter on the porch. That was just a stack of unread magazines piling up during a particularly rough week. Despite the mounting frustration, Alex tried to stay calm. They reasoned that if they could explain their situation, surely Karen would understand. After all, how could anyone expect someone battling illness to maintain flawless curb appeal? But when Alex attended their first HOA meeting, hope quickly turned into despair. As they stood before the board, trying to articulate their struggles, Karen cut them off mid-sentence. "You're dragging down property values," she declared loudly, glaring at Alex as though daring them to argue. The room fell silent except for the scribbling of pens taking notes. No one spoke up in Alex's defense, not even those who occasionally exchanged friendly waves across the street. Feeling defeated, Alex slunk back to their seat, realizing that Karen saw them not as a person but as a problem to be solved. As they walked home that evening, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being judged, not just by Karen, but by the entire neighborhood. What once felt like a safe haven now seemed suffocating. Little did they know, this encounter was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that would test their strength, resilience, and faith in humanity. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped neatly into Alex's mailbox like a silent threat. It was written in formal language, each word carefully chosen to sound professional yet intimidating. The heading read, "Official Notice of Violations." Below it, a list of infractions stared back at Alex: overgrown grass, improper mailbox alignment, visible clutter on the porch. Each item came with a deadline for correction and a warning that failure to comply would result in further action. Alex sighed deeply as they held the paper in trembling hands. They had seen these notices before, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about minor oversights anymore. It was personal. Karen's signature at the bottom of the page seemed to mock them, a reminder of her unyielding determination to make an example out of anyone who didn't meet her impossible standards. That evening, Alex sat at their kitchen table, staring at the letter while trying to figure out what to do next. Their mind raced with questions. How could they fix everything when even getting out of bed some days felt like climbing a mountain? Who could they turn to for help when most neighbors avoided eye contact, afraid of being dragged into HOA drama themselves? And why did Karen care so much about a patch of overgrown grass or a slightly crooked mailbox? Determined to resolve things peacefully, Alex decided to attend the upcoming HOA meeting. They spent hours preparing, jotting down notes about their health challenges and how those struggles impacted their ability to keep up with the relentless demands. Maybe if they explained their situation clearly, Karen and the others would show some compassion, or at least understanding. On the night of the meeting, Alex walked into the community center feeling nervous but hopeful. The room buzzed with chatter as neighbors gathered around folding chairs arranged in neat rows. At the front sat Karen and the rest of the HOA board, armed with clipboards and stern expressions. When Alex raised their hand to speak, the room fell silent. For a moment, all eyes were on them. "I understand there are concerns about my property," Alex began, their voice steady despite the knot of anxiety twisting in their stomach. "But I want you to know that I'm doing the best I can. My health issues make it hard to keep up with everything, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. I'm not ignoring the rules. I'm just struggling to manage." Karen listened without expression, her pen tapping impatiently against the table. When Alex finished speaking, she leaned forward, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Everyone has challenges, Alex," she said, emphasizing their name in a way that felt almost mocking. "But we can't let personal excuses stand in the way of maintaining our community standards. If you can't handle the responsibilities of living here, perhaps you should reconsider your priorities." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Alex opened their mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Instead, they felt the weight of judgment pressing down on them, heavier than ever before. Other board members nodded in agreement with Karen, their faces blank masks of indifference. Not a single person spoke up in Alex's defense, not even the ones who occasionally waved hello during morning walks. As the meeting continued, Alex sank lower in their chair, feeling smaller and more invisible with each passing minute. By the time it ended, they left the room quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Outside, the cool night air offered little comfort. Walking home under the dim glow of streetlights, Alex replayed Karen's words over and over in their head. Personal excuses. Was that really what their struggle amounted to? A mere inconvenience to be brushed aside. Back inside their house, Alex placed the official notice on the counter and stared at it for a long time. They knew they couldn't let this go unanswered, but exhaustion weighed heavily on their shoulders. For now, all they could do was hope that somehow things might get better. But deep down, a nagging fear crept in, that this was only the beginning of something far worse. Weeks passed, but the situation only grew worse. Alex had hoped that after the HOA meeting, Karen and the board might soften their stance, or at least give them more time to address the issues. Instead, the letters kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. The tone shifted from formal warnings to outright threats. Final notice read the latest envelope Alex found crumpled in their mailbox. It was impossible to ignore the growing sense of dread. By now, Alex's health had taken a turn for the worse. A particularly bad flare-up left them bedridden for days, unable to do anything beyond the bare minimum: eating, drinking water, and trying to rest. Thoughts of mowing the lawn or straightening the mailbox were laughable luxuries they couldn't afford. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through their chest, fearing it might be another visit from Karen or one of her cronies. Then came the day when everything spiraled out of control. Alex woke up feeling slightly better, enough to consider tackling some of the tasks piling up outside. But before they could even make it to the kitchen for breakfast, there was a sharp knock at the door. When they opened it, they froze in shock. Standing on the porch was Karen, flanked by two other members of the HOA board. Their expressions were cold and unyielding. "Good morning," Karen said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're here to discuss your noncompliance." Alex stammered, caught off guard. I'm working on it. I've been sick, but I'm doing my best." Karen cut them off mid-sentence, holding up a hand as if silencing a child. "Your excuses aren't helping anyone, Alex. You've had plenty of time to fix these problems, and yet nothing has changed. Clearly, you don't take this seriously." Before Alex could respond, Karen gestured to one of the men beside her. He pulled out a small device, a remote control, and pressed a button. There was a faint clicking sound, followed by silence. Confused, Alex stepped outside and realized what had happened. Their key fob system, which controlled access to the gated community, had been disabled. What did you just do?" Alex asked, their voice rising in alarm. "It's simple," Karen explained, her tone icy. "Until you prove you can follow the rules, you won't be leaving this property. Consider it motivation to get your act together." Alex's heart sank. They looked past Karen toward the electronic gate at the entrance of the neighborhood. Normally, residents used their key fobs to open it automatically. Without access, they were effectively trapped inside their own home. Panic bubbled up in their chest as the reality of the situation hit them like a freight train. "This is ridiculous," Alex exclaimed, their voice trembling. "You can't just lock me in my house. What about groceries? Doctor appointments? I have rights." Karen shrugged, feigning indifference. "Those are privileges, not rights, and until you show us you're capable of being a responsible homeowner, we're revoking those privileges. Once you clean up your act, we'll reconsider restoring your access." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her accomplices trailing behind her. Alex stood rooted to the spot, staring at the closed gate in disbelief. The enormity of what had just happened crashed over them like a wave. Trapped, in their own home, by people who claimed to care about the community but seemed intent on destroying lives instead. For the rest of the day, Alex paced back and forth, their mind racing. How could they survive like this? They had no way to leave for essentials, let alone attend medical appointments. Even ordering deliveries became complicated. Most drivers refused to enter the gated area without clearance, citing safety protocols. As night fell, Alex sat by the window, watching the empty street outside. The world beyond the gate felt impossibly far away, and for the first time, their once peaceful neighborhood felt less like a home and more like a prison. The fear of isolation settled heavily in their chest, but beneath it burned a flicker of anger. This wasn't right. No one deserved to be treated this way. Not because of illness, not because of circumstances beyond their control. Deep down, Alex knew they couldn't stay silent forever. Something had to change. But how? And who would listen? Trapped inside their home, Alex's world shrank to the four walls that surrounded them. The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Panic set in early on, but as the reality of their situation sank in, it gave way to a gnawing sense of helplessness. How could they survive like this? Every attempt to reach out for help seemed to hit a dead end. At first, Alex tried calling friends and acquaintances, hoping someone would step up. But most people didn't understand the severity of the situation. "Why don't you just talk to Karen?" one friend suggested over the phone, clearly unaware of how futile that would be. Others promised to check in later, but never followed through. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was more that no one wanted to get involved in what felt like an unwinnable battle against the HOA. Desperation drove Alex to explore other options. They turned to online grocery delivery services, only to discover that drivers refused to enter the gated community without proper clearance. One driver even called Alex while parked outside the gate, explaining apologetically, "I'm sorry, but company policy won't let me go any further. Maybe you can meet me out here." Alex hung up, frustrated tears welling in their eyes. Meeting the driver wasn't an option. They couldn't leave, and the driver couldn't come in. With no way to replenish supplies, Alex began rationing what little food they had left. A loaf of bread stretched into 3 meals, peanut butter smeared thinly across each slice. Canned goods became staples, eaten cold because cooking felt too exhausting when coupled with the stress of their predicament. Each trip to the pantry felt like opening a ticking clock. Every can removed brought them closer to running out completely. Medical needs added another layer of urgency. Alex relied on regular prescriptions to manage their chronic condition, but without access to the outside world, refilling them became impossible. They called their doctor's office, explaining the bizarre situation, but bureaucracy moved slowly. By the time a temporary solution was arranged, having medications mailed directly to their address, it was almost too late. Alex spent several sleepless nights worrying about what might happen if their health deteriorated further. Isolation took its toll not just physically, but emotionally. Days turned into weeks, and the silence of the house grew deafening. Neighbors passed by occasionally, some glancing curiously at Alex's property, but no one stopped to ask how they were doing. It was as though the neighborhood had collectively decided to look the other way, unwilling to challenge Karen or risk becoming targets themselves. Alex often stood by the window, watching cars drive past the gate, feeling invisible and forgotten. In moments of despair, anger flared within them. Why should they have to endure this? What gave Karen the right to dictate their life so cruelly? Yet anger offered little relief. It only fueled the cycle of frustration and exhaustion. At night, lying awake in bed, Alex replayed conversations in their head, imagining different outcomes where they stood up to Karen or found a way to escape the absurdity of their situation. But amidst the darkness, small sparks of resilience began to flicker. Alex started documenting everything. Every interaction with Karen, every letter from the HOA, every restriction placed upon them. They wrote down dates, times, and details, knowing instinctively that these records might prove valuable someday. If nothing else, it gave them something to focus on, a purpose beyond simply surviving day to day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Alex sat at their kitchen table surrounded by notes and receipts. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to entertain a sliver of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. Maybe someone, somewhere, would listen. And maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. It was on one of those quiet, suffocating afternoons that Sarah knocked on Alex's door. She wasn't a frequent visitor. In fact, Alex barely knew her beyond the occasional wave or polite greeting when their paths crossed in the neighborhood. But something about the way Sarah carried herself, a quiet confidence mixed with genuine concern, made her stand out from the rest. When Alex opened the door, they were surprised to see her standing there, holding a basket filled with fresh fruits, bread, and a thermos of soup. "Hi, Alex," she said softly, offering a small smile. "I noticed you haven't been around much lately, and I thought you might need this." For a moment, Alex didn't know what to say. The kindness caught them off guard, especially after weeks of being ignored or dismissed by nearly everyone else. "Thank you," they managed finally, stepping aside to let her in. As Sarah placed the basket on the counter, she glanced around the room, taking in the cluttered surfaces and the unmistakable signs of someone struggling to keep up. "I heard about what happened," Sarah said gently, sitting down at the kitchen table. Her tone wasn't accusatory or prying. It was simply honest. "The HOA locking you in. Well, it's crazy. No one should have to deal with that." Alex hesitated before responding. They had grown used to bottling everything up, afraid of burdening others with their problems. But something about Sarah's presence made it easier to open up. Slowly, haltingly, they began to tell her everything. The endless letters, the humiliating HOA meeting, Karen's cruel ultimatums, and finally, the disabling of their key fob. By the time they finished, tears welled in their eyes, though they tried to blink them away. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from sympathy to anger. "That's not just unfair. It's wrong," she said firmly. Karen can't just lock people inside their homes because she doesn't like how their grass looks. This isn't about community standards anymore. It's abuse of power. Her words ignited a spark of hope in Alex, but also fear. What can we even do? They asked, shaking their head. Karen runs everything around here. Everyone's too scared to speak up. Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady and determined. Not everyone. I'm not afraid of her, and neither should you be. We can fight back, starting by showing people what's really going on. If enough neighbors realize how far Karen's willing to go, they'll have to take a stand. Over the next few days, Sarah became Alex's lifeline. She brought groceries, helped sort through piles of paperwork, and encouraged Alex to document every detail of their ordeal. Together, they compiled evidence, photos of the overgrown lawn, which, in truth, wasn't nearly as bad as Karen claimed, copies of the official notices, screenshots of emails exchanged with the HOA, and notes detailing each interaction. Sarah even took pictures of the locked gate, capturing the absurdity of Alex's imprisonment. But documenting the issue wasn't enough. Sarah knew they needed allies if they wanted to make real change. So she started talking to other neighbors, casually at first, mentioning Alex's situation during morning walks or while chatting over fences. To her surprise, many shared similar frustrations with Karen's leadership. Some admitted they'd received their own warning letters for minor infractions, while others confessed they felt intimidated into silence. Encouraged by the growing support, Sarah organized a small group meeting at her house. About half a dozen neighbors showed up, all eager to hear Alex's story. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt seen, not as a problem or an inconvenience, but as a person whose rights had been trampled. One by one, the neighbors voiced their outrage, agreeing that Karen's actions went too far. We need to file formal grievances, Sarah suggested, pulling out a notebook where she'd jotted down ideas. If enough of us complain, the HOA board will have no choice but to address this. And if they don't, she paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We go public. The media loves stories like this. As the meeting wrapped up, Alex felt a glimmer of optimism they hadn't experienced in months. For so long, they had felt powerless against Karen's relentless authority. But now, surrounded by neighbors who cared enough to act, they'd realized they weren't alone. Change might still feel distant, but for the first time, it seemed possible. With Sarah's encouragement, Alex decided it was time to take the fight to the next level. The small group of neighbors had already drafted petitions and formal grievances, but they knew Karen wouldn't back down without a bigger push. So, Alex hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense professional who specialized in housing disputes and tenant rights. From the moment the lawyer entered the picture, the tone of the battle shifted. The legal team quickly got to work, reviewing every piece of evidence Alex and Sarah had gathered. The stack of warning letters, photos of the overgrown grass, which, frankly, looked like any other lawn in suburbia, screenshots of emails, and even recordings of tense phone calls with Karen. They argued that the HOA's actions weren't just unreasonable, they were illegal. By disabling Alex's key fob and effectively trapping them inside their home, the HOA had violated federal laws designed to protect individuals with disabilities. These laws required accommodations for people like Alex, whose health conditions made it difficult to meet arbitrary standards. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down, convinced she was untouchable. When news of the lawsuit reached her ears, she scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as a waste of everyone's time. At the next HOA meeting, she delivered a fiery speech, accusing Alex of trying to manipulate the system and claiming the neighborhood's reputation was under attack. "This isn't about fairness," she declared, slamming her fist on the table. "It's about accountability. If we let one person slide, where does it end?" But Karen's bravado couldn't shield her from the growing backlash. As word spread about Alex's situation, more neighbors began speaking out, not just within the community, but also to local reporters. One brave resident tipped off a journalist from the city newspaper, and soon, the story exploded into public view. Headlines blared phrases like HOA gone rogue, resident trapped in own home, and when community rules crossed the line. Overnight, what had started as a private dispute became a symbol of broader issues surrounding homeowners associations and unchecked power. The media attention put immense pressure on the HOA board. Phone calls poured in from angry citizens demanding answers, while online forums lit up with debates about whether such organizations should have so much control over people's lives. Even some of Karen's staunchest supporters began to distance themselves, realizing they didn't want to be associated with her increasingly toxic leadership style. For Alex, the spotlight was both terrifying and empowering. On one hand, they hated being the center of attention. The thought of strangers dissecting their life made them deeply uncomfortable. But on the other hand, seeing their struggle resonate with so many others gave them strength. Letters of support arrived daily, from people across the country sharing similar experiences with HOAs, to disability advocates praising Alex for standing up against injustice. As the case moved through the courts, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She tried rallying the remaining loyalists in the neighborhood, insisting that Alex was exaggerating their condition and exploiting sympathy for personal gain. But her arguments fell flat. More residents joined the petition against her, citing years of micromanagement and bullying. What had once been a tight-knit community now felt fractured, with Karen squarely at the center of the divide. Finally, after months of legal battles, depositions, and heated arguments, the court issued its ruling. The judge sided decisively with Alex, condemning the HOA's actions as discriminatory and unlawful. Not only was Karen ordered to reinstate Alex's key fob immediately, but the HOA was also fined heavily for emotional distress and medical complications caused by their negligence. In addition, Karen herself was removed from her position on the board and banned from holding any future leadership roles within the organization. When Alex heard the verdict, relief washed over them like a tidal wave. It wasn't just about winning, it was about validation. For the first time in months, they felt seen not as a burden or an inconvenience, but as someone worthy of respect and dignity. And though the scars of the ordeal would linger, they knew this victory marked the beginning of something new. The court's ruling sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, leaving no one untouched. For Alex, it was more than just a legal victory. It was a chance to reclaim their life. The judge's decision wasn't just about reinstating their key fob or paying damages. It was an acknowledgement of their humanity. For months, Karen and the HOA had treated them like a problem to be solved, but now they were finally seen as a person deserving compassion and fairness. Karen, on the other hand, didn't take the loss well. Stripped of her authority and humiliated in front of the entire community, she retreated into herself, avoiding eye contact with neighbors and skipping subsequent HOA meetings altogether. Her once commanding presence faded into quiet resentment. Some residents whispered that she spent her days drafting angry emails to state housing boards, trying unsuccessfully to overturn the court's decision. Others claimed she had started packing up her belongings, preparing to sell her house and leave the neighborhood for good. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Karen's reign of control was over. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA underwent a dramatic transformation. New leaders emerged, residents who prioritized kindness and collaboration over rigid enforcement. Sarah played a key role in this shift, stepping up to serve on the board and helping rewrite some of the outdated rules that had caused so much trouble. Under her guidance, the association adopted policies that better accommodated people with disabilities and focused on fostering a sense of community rather than policing every detail of its members' lives. For Alex, the changes brought both relief and healing, but also lingering challenges. While the financial compensation helped cover medical bills and repair some of the emotional toll, the scars of isolation ran deep. There were nights when anxiety crept back in, reminding them of the weeks spent trapped inside their home. But slowly, with time and support from friends like Sarah, They began to rebuild their sense of security. They started attending neighborhood gatherings again, tentatively at first, but eventually finding joy in reconnecting with others. Inspired by their own experience, Alex decided to turn their pain into purpose. They joined local advocacy groups focused on tenant and homeowner rights, sharing their story to raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked power within HOAs. At meetings and workshops, they spoke passionately about the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals from discrimination and abuse. Their voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was authentic. People listened, nodding along as Alex described how easily systems meant to protect could instead harm those they were supposed to serve. The neighborhood itself began to feel different too. Where once there had been tension and fear, there was now solidarity. Neighbors looked out for each other, offering help without judgment. When someone fell behind on lawn maintenance or needed assistance moving furniture, volunteers stepped forward willingly. The gated community, once a symbol of exclusion under Karen's leadership, transformed into a place where people genuinely cared for one another. Even the physical landscape of the neighborhood changed subtly. Flowers bloomed in shared garden spaces, planted collaboratively during weekend events organized by the new HOA board. Hand-painted signs appeared along sidewalks, bearing messages like "Welcome home" and "Together we thrive." These small acts of beauty reflected the renewed spirit of the community, a spirit Alex had unknowingly helped inspire. Looking back, Alex realized how far they'd come since those dark days of feeling invisible and powerless. Though the journey had been painful, it taught them something invaluable: resilience. They learned that standing up against injustice wasn't just about winning. It was about creating change, however small, that could ripple outward and touch countless lives. And while the memory of Karen's cruelty would always linger, it no longer defined them. Instead, Alex chose to focus on the future, a brighter, kinder chapter where everyone had a seat at the table, regardless of their struggles or circumstances. Months after the court's ruling, Alex stood on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The golden light bathed the neighborhood in warmth, casting long shadows across freshly mowed lawns and flower-lined sidewalks. It was a scene of quiet harmony, but for Alex, it carried a deeper meaning, a testament to how far they and their community had come. The garden that Alex once tended alone now flourished with contributions from neighbors who'd pitched in during tough times. A bright patch of marigolds near the mailbox caught their eye, a gift from Sarah, planted as a symbol of renewal and friendship. Even the mailbox itself, once crooked and criticized, now stood perfectly aligned, thanks to a neighbor who offered to fix it without being asked. These small gestures reminded Alex daily that kindness could rebuild what cruelty had torn apart. Inside the house, life felt steadier, though not without its challenges. Alex still dealt with the ups and downs of their chronic illness, but they no longer faced those battles alone. Friends checked in regularly, bringing meals or simply sitting with them when energy ran low. The sense of isolation that had once consumed them faded into something softer, moments of solitude rather than loneliness. Advocacy work became a cornerstone of Alex's new routine. They joined forces with local organizations fighting for fair housing practices and disability rights. Their story resonated deeply with others who had faced similar struggles, inspiring many to speak up about their own experiences. At public forums and town hall meetings, Alex's calm yet determined voice carried weight, urging policymakers to create systems that prioritized empathy over control. Their efforts even sparked broader change beyond the neighborhood. News outlets revisited their case, highlighting how grassroots movements could challenge entrenched power structures. Lawmakers took notice, proposing reforms to regulate HOAs more effectively and ensure accountability. While these changes wouldn't happen overnight, Alex found hope in knowing their fight had ignited a larger conversation, one that might prevent others from enduring what they had. The neighborhood transformed in ways both visible and intangible. Gone were the days of rigid rules enforced by fear. Instead, residents embraced flexibility and understanding. Newcomers to the area remarked on the welcoming atmosphere, unaware of the turmoil that had once gripped the community. Children played freely in cul-de-sacs, laughter echoing through streets where tension used to linger. Karen's name was rarely spoken anymore, reduced to little more than a cautionary tale whispered among older residents. For Alex, healing wasn't linear. There were still nights when memories of confinement crept in, leaving them restless and uneasy. But those moments grew fewer as time passed, replaced by gratitude for the support system they'd built. Sarah remained a steadfast ally, often joining Alex for evening walks or coffee chats. Together, they marveled at how much the neighborhood had changed, and how much they had grown alongside it. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alex attended a community event organized by the revamped HOA board. Tables lined the park, offering crafts, food, and information booths about local resources. As Alex wandered through the crowd, they noticed familiar faces smiling back at them, not with pity, but with genuine warmth. Someone called out their name, inviting them to join a group painting rocks to decorate the entrance gates. For a moment, Alex hesitated, then nodded, accepting the brush handed to them. As they painted, Alex reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had started as a nightmare of judgment and exclusion had turned into a story of resilience and unity. They realized that while they couldn't erase the past, they could shape the future, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. By the end of the day, colorful rocks adorned the gates, each one bearing messages of hope. Together we grow, kindness matters, and simply, welcome. Standing there, surrounded by neighbors laughing and chatting, Alex felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of their ordeal would always remain, but so would the lessons learned. That strength lies in vulnerability, courage in standing up for what's right, and true community in looking out for one another. And as the sun set once again, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alex smiled softly, knowing they were finally home, not just in their house, but in the hearts of those who cared.